I'd like to introduce my colleague, Michael Greaves, who is a barrister who's formerly worked on international war crimes at The Hague. Michael has a very good legal mind, and I would like Michael perhaps to open up and talk about the very legal argument for recognition for South Yemen. So, without further ado, I'll pass the microphone over to Michael Greaves. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just a quick word on terminology. The former colony of Aden, which we British once ruled over, has sailed under a variety of names over the years, and whilst the current preferred option might be South Arabia for any new entity that emerges from the troubled times that they've been experiencing, inevitably all those different names means that one slips between the various words South Yemen, South Arabia. So if I use one or the other, I'm sure you'll A, know what I'm talking about, and B, forgive me for slipping between the two. The story of South Yemen or South Arabia and its governance is complicated. In fact, one of the most complicated stories of the lot of British imperial history since the establishment of British rule in the first half of the 19th century. The British government seemed unable to make its mind up whether to govern Aden, as it was commonly referred to, through the Viceroy in India, or to do so from London as a conventional colony with a locally based governor. Whilst that of itself didn't make the governance of the lands we think of today as South Arabia any worse, there is a sense that that inconsistency of rule has perhaps fed through into the events of the post-colonial era. But in late 1967, the various entities that were governed by the UK in South Arabia came together as South Yemen, which swiftly transformed itself into a People's Republic. Given that this must have sent something of a shudder down the backs of both the State Department and the UK Foreign Office and other foreign ministries at the height of the Cold War, one could be forgiven for thinking their modern successors would be keen to see the establishment of a moderate democratic Arab state on the coast of the Gulf of Aden, it being one of the most important seaways anywhere in the world. South Yemen entered its new existence as an independent state, recognised by governments right across the world, and given all the memberships of the various international bodies that you would expect. One doesn't need to go into the details. You can see, in hindsight, that the experiment of trying to graft a fully blown communist state onto an Arabic society that hitherto had been both traditional and somewhat conservative was unlikely to succeed, not just because the People's Republic model was so disastrous, as its testing to destruction across the globe has amply demonstrated, but because of the character of the people of South Arabia was ill-suited to the kind of society envisaged. So we come to the end of the 1980s. In common with almost all the communist countries across the globe, the experiment had run its course, and far from bringing all the benefits that had been perceived, it can now be seen that it had not worked. For a whole host of reasons, the option of joining with North Yemen must have seemed a much better idea after all. So legally, what happened in 1990 with the establishment of the Republic of Yemen? An agreement was made between the two sides. Its formal title is an agreement establishing a union between the state of the Yemen Arab Republic and the state of the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. It was signed in April 1990. Now, the word union is actually something of a misleading phrase because of what, in fact, the effect of that document was. In terms, it's only 2 pages long, but it's a quite dramatic and remarkable document. It was, in effect, an international agreement, and it was to come into force when it was ratified on both sides, as it duly was. And this is Article 1, and it's quite simple. On the 26th of May 1990, there shall be established between the state of the Yemen Arab Republic and the state of the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, that's the south, both parts of the Yemeni homeland, a full and complete union based on a merger, and this is the important bit, in which the international personality of each of them is created in a single international person called the Republic of Yemen. The Republic of Yemen shall have one legislative, executive, and judicial power. So in just 76 words, the drafters of this agreement laid the ground upon ratification for what can only be described as the voluntary extinction of two existing subjects of international law, the North Yemen and South Yemen, and their instant replacement by a third entity, the Republic of Yemen. And legally speaking, it managed to do exactly what it said on the box. The United Nations recognized the Republic not as a new state, but as effectively the successor state, so that the newborn Republic became seamlessly a member of the United Nations and was deemed to have all the legal obligations and benefits of being a successor state, not a new state. Would that everything had gone smoothly thereafter. The 1991 Constitution, which has been amended several times since then, followed within a short space of time. It's a rather longer document, 28 pages with amendments. But today we can focus on Article 1, which is the crucial one for the people of the South today. And that says, the Republic of Yemen is an Arab, Islamic and independent sovereign state whose integrity is inviolable and no part of which may be ceded. The people of Yemen are part of the Arab and Islamic nation. And that, it seems to me, is a clear statement of where I believe the South stands today. The document says, for all to see, we are one state and we shall never agree to part with a single speck of sand. The old South Yemen is gone, both legally and practically, and if South Arabia is to arise from the ashes of the current Republic of Yemen, it's going to have to do it the hard way, which is by secession, and that will almost certainly, as it is at the moment, involve armed conflict. We know, and I'm not going to go into the history of it, we know the succession of events, civil war in 1994, further armed conflict, and then a further descent into war and chaos since 2011, have led us to where we are today. So, there is a serious armed conflict with various competing forces involved. Where does South Yemen stand today? Legally, there are four options that are open, and one is obviously remain as part of the Yemen under the current constitutional arrangements. That option is one which many doubtless still cling to, despite the reality on the ground. There is the option of federalism. That wouldn't necessarily breach the terms of the existing constitution, but it would require a degree of give and take that I believe is no longer available given events and the hardening of attitudes on both sides. The least attractive solution would be enhanced autonomy and devolution, and that, I suspect, is simply not a realistic prospect. We are left with the final option, which is secession and creation of a new state. That is not so ridiculous to think of because, of course, South Yemen was a state in its own right once upon a time, and so you're merely returning to the status ante quo. But that's too simple. It's a very big step. There will be very many obstacles on the way. And the situation of states which are secessionist states is really very unclear in international law. Since the advisory opinion on Kosovo, most commentators believe that it's an open question as to what the status of a secessionist state is. Serbia and its friends still claim Kosovo as part of Serbian territory and does not and will not accept the sovereignty of Kosovo. But the reality, and in the real world, this is what ultimately matters, is that if one manages successfully to break away, and you succeed in establishing what is, for all effective purposes, a state, other states will, if they see fit, recognise you as such, and the United Nations will eventually admit you to membership. And in the case of Kosovo, it is instructive. As of the 20th of May of this year, Kosovo has been recognised by 110 states as an independent state. 108 out of 193 United Nations member states have recognised them. 23 of the 28 European Union states, 4 out of 28 NATO states have recognised it, and 34 out of 57 of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation states have recognised Kosovo. As I say, Serbia doesn't recognise it, but it has begun to normalise its relations with Kosovo in accordance with the Brussels Agreement. The most recent country to recognise Kosovo is Antigua and Barbuda. United Nations membership is yet to come, but it will come, it surely must. Now, secession is important because if that is the aim which the Southern movement has, it needs to think about what the state will look like. The international criteria for statehood under Article 1 of the Montevideo Convention of 1933 is generally accepted as a proper statement of what states are. And notably, the EU Badanter Commission on the Yugoslavian breakup adopted the Montevideo definition of what a state is when it looked into the status of the various entities of the former Yugoslavia as they broke up. A state, for the purposes of international law, has to have the following qualifications. It has to have a permanent settled population. So you can't have an island which has people on it some part of the year, but not for others. It has to have a clearly defined territory. It has to have a government, and that government has to have the capacity to enter into relations with other states. Those are four quite simple propositions, in effect. And in relation to South Yemen, South Arabia, I believe can be satisfied relatively simply. I don't seek to make light of it, but they're not difficult things to establish. There is a permanent population in South Yemen, South Arabia. It's been there for thousands of years. There was, in the country which was South Yemen, a defined territory. It will not be difficult to establish what the territory is of the new South Yemen, South Arabia. There can and will be a government, I'm sure, in due course, and that government can easily establish the ability to enter into relations with other states. The existence of a state is a matter of international law. It does not depend on recognition, international recognition, which is a political act, not a legal act as such. And assuming the goal that the Southern movement has adopted is for secession and new statehood, the movement can begin to, slowly but surely, establish its international credentials. And one way in which it can do so, as the potential future government will, is to begin to act in a state-like manner, whose ultimate objective is the creation of a new South Arabia. Finally, the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Self-Determination of Peoples should mean what it says in the document. And you, as people of South Yemen, South Arabia, have that right. And if you decide, as a people, that what you want is to go back to a single state in South Arabia, South Yemen, then right in international law. And that's the most important thing to remember. When I say use the law as a weapon, there is a way in which you can use it. You should assert your right if that is what you want to do. No one can go against it. I commend the future to you. It is in your hands, not mine. It's your country, not mine. But I wish you every success because you deserve it.
Thank you, Michael, for a sensible, reasonable point of view and laying out very clearly the responsibilities of a sovereign nation.